So I've probably done over 10 to 15 interviews specifically for investment banking. And there's one question that I've gotten over and over and over again. And you will get this in every single interview. And it makes sense for this to be the starting question. Walk me through your resume. That's the question that's going to set the tone for the interview. And it's going to give you the interviewer the background they need to go ahead and further assess you. To start this off, let's just go over how this video is going to be structured. There's 4 parts to know to actually answer this question properly. We're going to go over each of those 4 parts. We're also going to go over a bonus tip that, quite frankly, I just don't see too often. So let's go ahead and get started. How do we actually answer walk me through your resume? The first and most important part is you just got to, in 1 or 2 sentences, establish your background. Don't spend any longer on that. So you're a student studying, I don't know, economics, and you went to some university and you were born and raised in this area. So just those 3 things. You can establish those within 2 sentences to start the question off. This is where I like to talk about the spark. So this is where it gets a little creative. You don't necessarily have to have the spark to do well on this question, but the spark will set you apart quite a bit. And the reason why I say that is because a lot of these answers just start to sound the same, and that's fine. You don't want to just over-engineer this answer to make it sound really different. You don't need to do any of that. But if you can logically point back to a spark that really kicked things off for you, that's going to help differentiate you quite a bit. Now, what does the spark actually look like? So there's a few different ways I've seen this done, and the most common way I've seen it done is people talking about personal anecdotes. So this individual, when they were walking me through that resume, they said that the reason why they got into banking was because their dad owned a small business, and the dad had a handful of advisors that upon sale of the business, they weren't necessarily giving him the best advice. And so the dad was constantly talking to the son about this throughout the sale of the business. And it ultimately was not a good outcome for the dad because the advisors to the business were not properly guiding the dad. And so that stood out to the son. And that was the spark that they gave in the walk me through your resume question that had them go ahead and get into banking. So that can definitely differentiate someone if that's the type of personal anecdote that you're using. It stands out. If I was the interviewer, I would remember that answer. I was talking to a colleague and we were both going over whether the candidate made sense. We'd say, "Oh, do you remember that one candidate? Oh, you mean the one whose dad's business got decimated? Yeah, he was pretty good. He did a good job." So it's you stand out, you differentiate yourself quite a bit. Now, the third part of this is you now have to build up chronologically what you've done after that spark. So what have you built upon? So I got into banking because I was interested in becoming an advisor after seeing what happened to my dad when he was selling his business. Now, in college, I spent a bunch of time in this investment club. I'm a part of this finance club. I did this boutique internship in banking, and that's all further reaffirmed my interest. And when I was doing the banking internship, I actually saw what it was like to be a good advisor. So we were a part of this one engagement where we helped successfully guide this business owner through the sale of his business to XYZ party. If the deal is disclosed, you can say that. So that's how you would now bring it all back together and show what you've done since then. And then lastly, the fourth part of this question is going to be to bring it all back to the now. So why now? So why are you applying to this bank? What about this group? You don't have to answer all that, but if you can very quickly do it and talk about why now, that would perfectly wrap up the answer. And so then the why now, you can wrap it up by maybe giving 1 or 2 tidbits about what is interesting about this particular bank and why are you now going ahead and interviewing? When I was doing this interview, I was getting into the industrials group, a middle market bank. And so when I was asked what it is about our investment bank that's interesting or our group that's interesting, I knew that was going to be asked beforehand. So I didn't even wait until the question was asked. I kind of wove it into the walk me through your resume towards the end. And I said, Industrials Group is one of the largest groups at the bank, and I wanted to get a broad exposure of different companies and a variety of different companies. I didn't really want to be a specialist, so I wanted to be a generalist. So that's why I'm really interested in joining the Industrials Group. If you can do that in 90 seconds, maybe even 2 minutes, that's fine. The personal anecdote or the spark is a bit longer, that's fine. So those are the 4 parts to correctly answer that question. You got to start off with a quick intro, 1 or 2 sentences about where you're from, what school you went to, what you're studying. The second part is the spark. You don't necessarily have to have a great spark. It's not going to hold you down, but it will definitely differentiate you if you do have a great spark. The third part now is after the Spark, what have you done? So clubs, internships, anything, this is where you talk about that. And then lastly, why now? So that's going to be bringing it all back together, maybe even throwing a tidbit about why that group is interesting to you. And that's how you now wrap this all up in 90 to 120 seconds. So the other way that you can also now further differentiate this, and this is the one I don't see too often, but if you can research the interviewer beforehand, and if you happen to notice commonality between you two, you can definitely go ahead and mention that, and it resonates well with an interviewer. I've seen this done a couple times to me, actually, where someone had researched a specific club or a specific area that I was from, and they were able to point out some commonalities, or that they've been there before or done this, and sometimes you'll talk about that for a few minutes, and it kind of gets the interview off going pretty easily. So that always helps. So always look into the interviewer beforehand and see if there's anything you notice about their background that could be relevant here. Now, lastly, what we could talk about is the most common pitfalls that I've seen whenever we're asking this question and just interviewing candidates in general. The first one is the answer is too long. We already established that in the earlier part of this video. So either too long or too short. So timing is a big one. The next part is there's a bit of awkwardness, and that's fine. Whenever you're having an interview, it could sometimes be a little awkward, but you have to just have a conversation. It has to be a little bit conversational. So if you need to get enough reps, maybe in the mirror or do enough mock interviews, just go ahead and do that. Ideally, you want to reduce the amount of times you pause and slip up. So just try to make it as conversational as possible. The next part that sometimes gets a little weird is eye contact. You'll have sometimes the interviewee either doing too much eye contact or too little eye contact. So you don't want to constantly stare into someone's eyes deep into their soul for the entire interview, because then they're just going to think you're a psychopath. You also don't want to just continuously break eye contact and not even make any eye contact. That's also pretty weird. So just find the common line in between. And again, just make it conversational, just as if you were talking to a friend. And then lastly, don't memorize your answer. This is what I've seen that's really common. You'll see students definitely memorize their answer. You could tell it just seems too scripted. It seems like you're trying to remember the script that you read over and over again. The way I used to do it is I had a general template and I knew generally what I was going to say, but I never really had a script. At any interview I walked into, it would sometimes change from the interview how I worded some of these experiences. It was a bit more fluid. So it was never really any script. And depending on how I woke up that day, sometimes the answer sounded a little different. I wasn't just completely changing the story up, but you get what I'm saying. The wording was a little bit different. So those are some of the common pitfalls I've seen. And with enough repetitions, you'll go ahead and be able to mitigate some of these things. Now, if you're interested in just doing mock interviews, we actually also built an interview simulator on the Athena private equity platform. This helps you go ahead and do mock interviews. And then we have an AI system that provides a grade. Now, this grade is going to be based on tone, context, and technical knowledge as well, because some of the questions that are asked in this interview will be technical questions, and then also just general behavioral questions. So it's a pretty well-encompassing rubric that is assessed by an AI. So you go ahead and record your interview, upload it, and it's going to give you a grade based on how the interview goes. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check it out on our platform. Thanks.